Aurelia allows you to define both custom attributes and custom elements. And if you want to do direct DOM manipulation, these are the types of components that you want to build because you can actually inject the element that your attribute is associated with or that represents your custom element. And at that point, you can use the DOM APIs or use a library like jQuery to manipulate things that are on the page. What I want to do is show you a couple different approaches to building a custom element. And I'd like to do that using this navigation menu that we have inside of the application view. This might represent a piece of HTML that I want to reuse throughout the application or throughout several applications. Or it might be that I just want to cut this out and package it up into a custom element like nav menu, just to simplify this application view and make it very apparent that there are a couple different view models that participate in building up this application view. There's the nav menu, and then there's the router view, whatever is dynamically loaded by the router. I could also take this animated spinner that shows when the router is navigating and make that into a custom element, but let's concentrate on just nav menu for now. In order to build out this custom element, I'm going to need to build a view and a view model. So once again, we've seen this all through Aurelia, the view and view model combination. I'm going to build out a custom view and a view model in a new folder that I'm going to create. Let's call it resources. This isn't required, but I'm thinking a folder like resources will give me a common area where I can place reusable components and use them throughout the application. So it's inside of resources where I want to add first a JavaScript file. Let's call it nav-menu.js. That will be the view model, and also the view, which will be an HTML file with the name of nav-menu. And inside of here, once again, I'm going to use a template element, and then I'm going to paste in the markup that I took out of the app view. So that entire navigation menu, I'm going to paste it into the nav-menu view. And now, this nav menu works a little bit different than the other view model pairs we've been using so far. This view model is going to need to expose a router that I can use inside of data binding expressions and string interpolation expressions and all throughout this view. But the way I want to get to this router is a little bit different than the way I've gotten to data with other view models. With other view models, when I've needed something, I've simply injected the component and I've let the DI container decide what to hand me. In this case, I want the consumer of this custom element, or the view that is using this custom element, to tell me what router to use. So it's not something that I want to inject, and I'm not sure what context that router came from. This is something that I want my parent to explicitly hand to me. And that means I'm going to need to write my view model in a particular way so that from a view like the app view, I'll be able to say something like, I want a nav menu, and by the way, that nav menu needs a router. So I want to bind the router of the nav menu to the same router that I'm using. That's what this syntax would be saying. And that's what's going to allow me inside of a view to communicate with the custom elements and the custom attributes I have. I'm going to be able to communicate with them because they can expose properties from the view model in a certain way that I can bind to those things from my view. So how would I write the view model so I can do this? Well, let's start with a class. I will call it nav menu. And what I'm going to do is import a new decorator that we haven't seen yet. It's called bindable. I'm going to import that from Aurelia Framework. And the way I can use this particular annotation is to use it to create a property on this view model. So I want a property called router that is bindable through attributes in the view. I'm going to initialize it to null, but it is this simple one line of code that will allow me to use syntax like router.bind equals router, where router is the name of this property. Now, before I forget, there is one configuration change that I'm going to need to make for this particular syntax to use. This configuration change is in the config.js file. We've been in here before when we needed to modify some of the optional options for our transpiler. We had to enable ES7 decorators. Well, in order for this bindable syntax to work properly, we're also going to have to enable another ES7 feature. It is called class properties. This enables a special syntax that bindable annotation / decorator will take advantage of to build out the property for my view model, that router property. And then there's one last piece or one last change I need to make, inside of app.html to get this to work. Currently, Aurelia does not know what a nav-menu is. It doesn't automatically go searching through all of the HTML views that I have to find custom elements. So I need to do one of two things. I either need to make this globally available throughout the application, which is what we'll do next, or I need to give Aurelia a hint inside of this view that it will be using something called nav menu. And the way I do that is using a require custom element that Aurelia provides. It's a lot like an import statement in JavaScript. It's a way of telling Aurelia, I require this other component from, and in this case, it is in resources, and I basically just need to specify a module name. So I need to specify nav menu. And with this in place, if I save everything, I should be able to refresh the application. And I still have a navigation menu, but I also have a custom element for that navigation menu. I can use this from anywhere just with these 2 lines of code. So next, let's look at the process of globalizing navigation menu, so I don't even need this require. Now let's see what it takes to get rid of this require element so that I am able to use nav menu anywhere without using a require. And just to make sure this works, let me refresh the application without the require. And you can see I currently have no navigation bar because Aurelia doesn't know about this element. In order to get this to work, I basically need to register nav menu as a global resource. So let me show you a common pattern with Aurelia to do that. What I'm going to do is come into main.js. So remember, this is the bootstrapping of the application. This is where we configure everything before we really start the application running. And chances are nav menu is not going to be the only custom element that I want to create in an application. Chances are I'm going to have more. So what I want to do is really treat my resources directory as a directory full of plugins, custom elements, custom attributes, other things that I just want to plug into the Aurelia framework as if they were there from the very beginning. And with plugin, you basically specify a module name here. So the previous plugin was Aurelia Validation. That's a well-known name, something that we installed with JSPM. For my plugin that is local to this application, I'll tell plugin to go to the resources directory and to load up a module called index. So literally, it's going to look for an index.js file. And that's a common convention that you'll see with modules throughout the world of JavaScript, both in Node.js and with ECMAScript 6. When you want to have some entry point for a folder full of utilities and components and classes that other people want to use, you might commonly provide an index.js root module that people can load to take advantage of all the things that are in that folder. What index can do is aggregate those things together. So just like index.html is a default HTML file for a folder, index.js becomes the default file or the default module for a folder full of JavaScript files or JavaScript modules. And so I will need to go into resources and create index.js. And what Aurelia will do when you specify a module as a plugin is it will do something very similar to what we have here for main.js. Aurelia will load up that module and expect you to export a configuration function, and Aurelia will invoke that function, passing in an Aurelia parameter that represents the framework, and then you can use the Aurelia APIs to register your different components, your custom attributes, your custom elements. So just like I have there in main.js, I'm going to export a function named configure that takes a parameter, I'll call it Aurelia, and one of the APIs that is available for Aurelia is an API globalize resources. And this method can take a variable number of arguments which just specifies all of the modules that you want Aurelia to pick up and globalize, make globally available. So if I specify that in this folder, there's a component called nav menu, Aurelia will now recognize that view and view model pair as something that is a candidate to be a custom element. Now what I'm showing you really is just the tip of the iceberg. It's the minimum amount of syntax that you need to get this to work. But let's just save everything and refresh and try it. And I can see now that my nav menu is back. But I do want to point out that there is a tremendous amount of functionality and ability to customize everything that I've just shown you by using additional APIs and additional features that Aurelia provides. So this is just the tip of the iceberg. This is how easy it can be to build a custom element. And you might be thinking that this is very similar to that compose element that we saw we saw compose very early in the course. I can say something like compose view model, and I'd be able to point it to resources/nav menu, and I'd even be able to bind the router. So yes, these two basically equivalent. It's just a question of whether or not you want a custom element or you want to use compose. If you're thinking about building widgets that other people can use, then the custom element approach is a great way to go. And again, I've showed you the simplified API. There's all sorts of other decorators and properties and API methods that you can use to customize this experience.